Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Entrepreneurship Week here at Northeastern University. My name is Wendy Eaton, and I'm the Associate Director of the McCarthy's Venture Mentoring Network here on campus. Our program is dedicated to supporting Northeastern affiliated ventures, helping them scale, launch, and grow their businesses with the help of the incredible mentors in our network. Now, I'd like to thank you all for joining me today for this panel on storytelling for early stage startups. We have an incredible array of panelists here. And before I introduce our moderator, I want to remind you of the format for today's event. The panel discussion will last for about 30 minutes with 20 minutes of Q&A following. So please post any questions you have in the chat. We'll get to them at the end. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce Wen Tao. Wen Tao is the co-founder and CEO of CACTIVATE, a startup that leverages AI to provide a plug-and-play autonomous marketing solution for small businesses and startups. He graduated in 2017 from DeMoore McKim Business School and started CACTIVATE with two other alums at our very own Idea Venture Accelerator. Over to you, Wen Tao. Take it away.
Hey everyone, thank you very much for being here today, and thank you for that introduction, Wendy. So we took a look at the audience list, and a lot of mentors and ventures here today. So I figured that's how we gear today's conversation toward to really make sure everyone's getting a good experience. We are very lucky to have some amazing panelists here today that we've been able to gather from all over the US. First and foremost, we have Debi. She is literally one of the best advisors and mentors that a startup could possibly hope for. She's also an active investor and the author of a book that I recommend you all check out. It's called First Pitch: Winning Money, Mentors, and More for Your Startup. I'll be doing a giveaway of that, of 2 copies to 2 audience members at the end. Then we have Mike. Mike is one of the most interesting people you'll ever meet. He was a bouncer, he was an admin, or some people say madman, and now is a partner at one of the most esteemed VC firms in the country called G20 Ventures. And last but not least, we have Drew, who's one of our very own, graduating in 2012, started at 10, and now is the founder and chairman of Crystal Knows, a startup that uses AI to provide personality insights for companies, sales, hiring, training processes, you name it. It is definitely one of the most successful alumni ventures, and we're very lucky to have him. So what we'll do is we'll really start today with focusing on the large questions, the what, why, and how. So let's dive right in. So why don't I start with you, Debi? So I'll post this question and then the panelists can take them one-on-one as you see fit. Feel free to interact. But I figured we start with, really setting the scene. So what is to you a story? How is that different from just simply laying out the facts? Like what to you construes a story, Debi?
Well, I think the importance of storytelling and creating a story for you and your startup is the idea of making an emotional connection to the listener. So the difference between storytelling and just talking about data or facts is being engaging, taking people on a journey with you and creating that emotional connection so they actually really start to care about what you're talking about. And, people have been learning from stories since the beginning of time, right? It's probably the oldest form of communication that ever was. And so our brains are wired to like stories. Our brains are wired to remember stories. So being memorable is actually a great thing when you're an entrepreneur. It's a really important thing. So if you have a great story to tell and you sort of help it unfold and you capture people's imaginations, you're going to be very memorable. They're going to be able to repeat your story to other people, creating a ripple effect of interest. And in fact, our brains actually react to storytelling differently than they react to data. Our brains go into listening mode when you are telling a story versus when you're sharing dry data and facts, it goes into evaluation mode. And so it's looking for mistakes and errors, what you're saying, and it's judging. But when you're in storytelling mode, people are just listening. So those are some of the ways that, being great at storytelling can be helpful to you and crafting that story. Being engaging and making an emotional connection can be really effective.
Wow, that's really interesting. Mike, do you have anything to add to that? Well, what about a story to you?
I think that's very well said. All the data in the world won't change someone's mind. Only a story can do that. And those of you who have crabby uncles coming over for Thanksgiving, I'm sure are intimately familiar with this phenomenon. I mean, the nature of what we do is we're going from 0 to 1, right? We're changing the world. We're bringing something into existence that didn't exist before. To get a startup thriving, you need to change minds. You need to position yourself in a way that attracts not only customers, but people and capital. And in order to do that, you need to get people excited. You need to signal relevance to the people you can help, and hopefully have them able to share your story with those beyond them to create this kind of geometric reach. And as Deb said, the only way to do that is a story.
Yeah, and so for the audience, Mike and Debbie, they're both very seasoned investors. They listen to a ton of stories. Drew here has, if I remember correctly, back in 2018, gone as far as to raise a Series B. So he's told a bunch of stories as well. What's your perspective, Drew?
Yeah, sorry, I was very engrossed in listening to those ones. I think that, so having been in this business in particular for about 7 years now, I've learned that the story is really the only thing that stays constant at the core. Like even me and my job hasn't been as consistently there as the story. We, since the beginning of Crystal, have an entirely different staff, and we have very different product features. We have really different market and types of customers. There's not a lot that has stayed the same. We have a different mascot. We used to be this little cube, and now we have this little rodent type character. There's a lot about the branding and everything that has changed. But the funny thing is, when I tell the story of Crystal at a party, it's still roughly the same thing. Like this story, and for us, depends how deep you want to go, but it's all about understanding people better and communicating more effectively, and understanding that people have differences. And when you kind of adapt to those differences, you can just have much better relationships and business outcomes. So that story for us has not changed from the beginning. And there's a lot more below it that has changed. The story leads to different technologies. So various times we can talk about different features of the product, or we can talk about our growth or the amount of money we've raised. A lot of this stuff is moving around it, but it's anchored by this thing. So I've learned to not see the story as something to layer on top. It's like a marketing message. The story really is the core, and all the other stuff is built around it. So I think it's really, really important.
Right. And so I think that we pretty much actually got into the second question a little bit, which is, the why. Why is the story really important? What I figured we could do is, if our panelists maybe have an example in their mind, really present this to the audience, and maybe we can start in reverse order this time. So Drew, do you maybe have an example of a story, one time what worked really well, or maybe not so well, but just so we can understand what that's like in action?
Yeah, I can. So our series, this is just a fun thing. Our Series A, we raised our Series A pretty shortly after launching the company. This was in 2015. And I remember, this doesn't happen usually, but I just got really lucky in that Crystal kind of hit a nerve at the right time, where it was, I launched it in March. The Huffington Post picked it up, and they started telling the story in a certain way, where it was hey, there's this creepy email app that's analyzing personality and stuff, and kind of ran away. It got away. And then I remember once that happened, that was the boost that got us really off the ground, because then it got into TechCrunch and Wired and all these things. And I remember all of a sudden the story got away from me. So people were talking about it as, you remember Cambridge Analytica, all this stuff was kind of happening around that time, where people were really skeptical of big data, and as they should be, as they still should be. So I was getting all these questions that I didn't anticipate. All I was trying to do is build a cool LinkedIn extension or thing to help people write better emails, and it was like that. But I'm getting questions about is this the singularity? Are we having, is this Black Mirror coming to life? And I'm all of a sudden defending a thing that I didn't even intend to be in the first place. So I remember having to be really careful about, or not careful, but really thoughtful about what we were, and explaining it. Hey, no, this isn't some big scary AI that is going to, take over the world. This is a tool to actually enhance human connection with each other. And I had to really refine what our message was. And then that changed you can kind of see it in the articles that got written about it in the next, few months after that was, it became a much more collaborative relationship. In that sense, it was really PR oriented. So I got the opportunity to be on like several like big podcasts and stuff. And instead of what they kind of wanted it to be, and the reason why it took off. So it's partially a good thing because they were looking for like a scandal. But instead of that, it was, oh, wow, look, this actually is a really cool application of a technology that most people don't get to use every day. So it became an exciting, positive thing. And that's what translated ultimately into our like Series A round with Salesforce, and they got behind it and everything. So that was the thing that came to mind immediately, was someone telling our story without the thought behind it.
To stick with you, Drew. So that story that you told, from obviously when you first founded it to Series A, with other people telling as well to Series B, has it changed over time, or what parts of it has changed? I'm assuming some things maybe in the way you deliver it has changed. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, it has changed a little bit. Like if you were to look at the headline of the website, this is like a hobby of mine. I love seeing the sentence that companies use to describe themselves on their website, because it's just like so different. And I feel like there's just so much packed into that. You can really get a feel for the whole company. And there's different points where, if you ask me what Crystal does at a party, I've said the same thing since 2014. Like, oh, this can tell you anybody's personality and helps communicate with them better. It actually feels weird like saying anything else. Like, hey, what do you do? I own a software company. What does it do? Oh, it tells you anyone's personality and helps communicate with them better. Like, it just comes out, But on our website, we've had get access to, the world's largest and most accurate personality database. We've had the biggest improvement to email since spell check. I mean, I think now it's really disk specific. It's all about like a disk platform for growing companies, because we've gotten more enterprise. So that's definitely changed, and it's reflected our like attempt to grow this from a cool tool into a more like steady enterprise level business. So that's kind of like the marketing messaging around that has changed, but the story itself, I don't know if you want to call that the core, is not really.
Mike, you must have seen a lot of startups tell and twitch and twist their stories. What are some examples you could share with us?
Well, I'll give you an example from my time on the other side, as a Jedi before I became a Sith here on the. So I joined a company called Actifio, and that was struggling to get traction in the market, and I'm gonna share with you the way that they talked about what they did before I arrived, and then I'll talk about the way that changed. So they used to say, their sentence was, Actifio is a protection and availability storage platform that pioneered the industry's first storage system optimized for managing copies of production data, eliminating redundant silos of IT infrastructure and data management applications. All right, so who's interested in that?
I'm asleep, Mike. I'm asleep.
You're asleep. You're unconscious. Somebody wake Deb up. All right. So when I came in, I was like, look, when you take a picture with your phone, you create, let's say, a 1 meg photo. You send that picture off into Instagram, and so now you got 2 megs of photo, right? There's a copy there, and you have a copy. And let's say you send it to Facebook and put it on Twitter, and it goes into your Google Photos and whatever. So that 1 meg photo could eventually be like 12 meg of data distributed across all these cloud and data center environments. Well, the same thing happens in a business, but it's not a 1 meg photo. It's a 16 terabyte Oracle database. And around the world, that costs companies billions and billions of dollars. And Actifio solves that problem, creating a single golden copy of the data that's most important to your business that you can access immediately from anywhere. Okay. So that story really got us to a unicorn valuation. A company was eventually acquired by Google, but that's the difference. Is trying to build a narrative, to talk about a problem, to talk about a struggle, to bring it alive in the mind of the listener and get them to engage and learn more.
Well, and so when you go about that, I mean, I'm assuming you just didn't come in on day one and come up with that story. Did you have to go through iteration? Did you have to test that? How does that come about?
Well, for me, I think the marketing follows the face-to-face. So I interviewed in my first week there, talked to a lot of people who were telling stories. They were all telling different stories, by the way, which is another problem that makes progress difficult. And I just sort of tried to take what are the 4 or 5 best ways of telling the story and polish them up. And in that case, what I did was I went to a trade show and I tried, story A from 9 to 10 and story B from 10 to 11 and story C, etc. And by the end of that day, I knew copy data was an idea that got people excited about what we did. And there were lots of other use cases that technology served, but copy data as an idea, as a new category, I knew it worked because I saw people light up at the trade show. I saw people really of all the ways of telling the story, that was the one. And then once I had that, then I took that story, polished it up, and had it proliferate across all of our touch points with the marketplace. Because I knew, and importantly, I could convince everyone telling other stories that this was a better one. And that's what I recommend to people to do. Find something that works face-to-face, which is always the most impactful form of communication, and then distribute that across every contact point with the market.
Very insightful. And now, Debi, I'm sure you have a ton to share. So what's the one that sticks out on top of your mind?
Well, I think when I work with a lot of really early stage founders. So for a lot of them, the storytelling that they do tends to be around the origin story of the idea or the startup or the problem that they want to solve. And I find that particularly in the earliest stages of a company, that is a very effective way to get people to care, as long as you're telling that story in a compelling way. So I've heard many, many, many origin stories in pitches. And I think that they all actually, the good ones tend to kind of follow that hero's journey framework or construction, where there's, the world today, you kind of take them on a journey with you and the problem gets worse and worse. And then, you're going to solve the problem with your solution sort of somewhere shortly after the climax of everything is the worst it could possibly be. And then it sort of ends with, how the world has changed because your startup exists. So for me, I mean, my favorite entrepreneur story came from one of my former students. Her name's Emily Levy, and she has chronic Lyme disease, and she created a company that was around adaptive wear. Her first product was hiding the PICC line that delivered antibiotics to her constantly to treat her Lyme disease, so that she could cover up her PICC line and not feel, self-conscious about it. And she talks about this story as a college student. She was going to class, and she would be sitting there with a medical tube coming out of her arm, delivering the antibiotics. And the cute hockey player sitting next to her in her finance class was looking at her like she was a walking disease. And she tells it with such humility and such humor and such grace. She has this terrible disease that she lives with every day. And yet she could tell this story in a way that everybody could relate to, right? We don't all have Lyme disease, but we can all, no matter who you are, understand what it feels like to have someone looking at you in a way that makes you feel less. But then she also sort of adds that bit of humor to it, because everyone can pretty much picture what it's like to be a college student and want the cute hockey player to think that you're not a walking disease. So she combines all that in her origin story about why she created her adaptive wear company. And I think it's super effective because it gets you to know her as a founder. You start to feel compelled to help her, because it's this very emotional story, right? This is something that happened to her personally, but it's also something that happens to millions of people who have diseases that require them to have medical apparatus on their bodies at all times. So her story is one of empowerment and one of confidence, even though she's talking about just this very particular instance of her having a medical tube coming out of her arm. So she's really effective in telling it because it is personal to her, but at the same time, it's kind of this universal feeling that everybody can relate to. And, she kind of draws it out and makes some drama about it. But at the end of the day, it's very humorous. And so you can feel the audience lean in when she tells it. And then you can also feel them smile as she tells sort of the punchline. So I think that her story is extremely, extremely effective. I think the best stories that I hear are really great about pulling in their unique value proposition into the story and sort of making it the thread that's pulled through the story. So at the end of the story, you not only know something about the founder, or you have a feeling about the founder, but you also know what makes this company really unique.
Yeah, you had me smiling there for a bit. So I think you tell that story very well. So I think that if we just take another different angle right now, a lot of, again, attendees are young entrepreneurs. So I think that assuming that they have some kind of idea or they're very early in their journey, I think that the biggest question is how. Right? So how do I go about constructing my story, also delivering my story? You know, we feel like we got the pain point or maybe kind of a solution, but how would you recommend or guide someone that's telling or constructing their story for the first time? Why don't we start with you this time, Mike?
Well, you should read Debi's book. The discount version of that, I wrote a blog post called "How to Tell a Startup Story." It's on Medium. It lays out this methodology. But for me, like, I found that it helps to break down what are the component parts of your customer value proposition. Like, how do you define the way you create value in the world from the customer in, as opposed to from the product out? And so I will tend to break it down into, okay, who is the target? Who am I talking to? Within that target, what is the segment most highly predisposed to the solution that I'm delivering? What's the name of my company? What's the category of which I am a part? What makes me special in that category? And then finally, what is proof that I can, that I am all that I claim? And once you have those pieces, you can kind of string them into a sentence that is, for category who our segment, brand provides for target who our segment, brand provides the category with distinction because of proof. Okay, for target who our segment, brand provides the category with distinction because of proof. And what that does is it sort of forces you into a box to really think through the individual pieces and then string them into a kind of sentence. And even if that sentence is cumbersome, now you're working towards some structured way to articulate your value prop that hopefully has an implied or explicitly stated good guy and bad guy, and that is the starting point, right? You can work towards a more clever or artful turn of phrase after you've done the work to really get to a place of clarity and alignment in your team about the nature of the value that you create. So I would go with a more structured approach, starting with components, stringing them together, and then working towards some more lyrical turn of phrase in that order.
Yes, that's just to extend that, and I'll ask this for the other panelists as well. Oftentimes, at least in my personal journey, sometimes I've found it difficult to distinguish between a pain point and an itch point. You think the story makes sense because you tell and you discover the story. But now that I've followed that framework and I've got my story, how do I validate that this is an actual monetizable or realistic story that I can tell? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, tell it and watch. To be a great marketing person, people think it's to have a clever way of talking. The best marketing people I know are listeners. They are students of human response. And that's the best way to create a story that works, is to just start telling it and watch. Does it turn people on? Do you see the light go off? Does the penny drop? Like, pick your metaphor. When someone is engaged versus someone who is like, whoa, and so you have to go out in the world and soil yourself with the uncertainties of real human contact. You can't tweet it and you gotta go out, tell it, see what happens, and then just keep refining until you get something that connects. That's the magic point. That's when the marketing really begins.
Got it. Just to quickly for the audiences, we've linked Mike's article in the chat, and if anyone wants to, feel free to start posing your questions, and then we'll get to them in the Q&A. So moving on, Debi, let's take this to you. The same question about constructing a story, the how. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely follow what Mike is talking about in terms of the different, it allows you to really understand how you want to position that story when you follow the structure that he's talking about. And that's really important in making sure that it lands right on the person that you're giving it to. But the other thing I talk about with people who want to kind of find their story is I literally sit with them. It's almost like a therapy session. I sit with them and I constantly like kind of drill home, like, why? Like, tell me about your startup, but why? Why are you doing this? Tell me more about what's driving you this way or that way. Tell me more about the competition, and just, you know, keep digging and digging and digging. And what I'm digging for is, what's the emotion I want the audience to feel when they hear my story. I'm digging for that, again, as I said earlier, that emotional connection with the person I'm trying to speak with. I'm trying to persuade them to do something, whether it's to be interested, to ask the next question, to go online and buy my thing, whatever it may be, to give me money. But in order to persuade them to do something, I need to get them to feel something. So in sort of digging deep on their why and why they're doing this, and why does this company need to exist in the world, and why is it different, I'm trying to get at what's the emotion they're trying to make the audience feel. And once they identify that emotion, it becomes easier to kind of figure out what story you want to tell and how you want to tell it.
Any good and bad whys that you've heard? You know, what's a good why? What's a bad why?
Well, a bad why is, I'm building this company so I can make $1 million and get rich and get the Lamborghini I've had my eye on forever. Not a great story. People don't really tend to care about that stuff. Good stories happen. Good stories could be anything. I mean, you don't have to be curing cancer with your startup in order to get people to care about it, to feel something about it. I mean, Jamie Siminoff, when he created the Ring doorbell, told a story about neighborhood safety and the reason why he created his Ring doorbell, which is an online video doorbell. If anybody doesn't know, you know, you can see through the doorbell who's at your front door and answer it even if you're not home, and those kinds of things. So it wasn't about a doorbell for him. It was about neighborhood safety. It was about feeling comfortable that his family was safe in their house if he wasn't around, or he couldn't answer the door, or if he was away, that his home was safe. So he wanted people to feel something about neighborhood safety, which are both loaded words with lots of emotion and interest and imagery associated with them. Versus just sort of saying, you know, I want to build an online doorbell because I think everybody needs one and I really want to make a lot of money. So trying to find that sort of why that's compelling, that's emotional, that people can relate to, I think is really the key to constructing your story, or the start of constructing your story.
And that ties very well into the hero journey, which, so everyone get Debi's book. How about you, Drew? What do you think about this? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
When I think of, so I'm not sure if anybody else here is naturally introverted, but I'm really not good at small talk. So I'll be some people are just really gifted at that and getting people to open up and, you know, bring out, when you meet a new person, just kind of like bring out the conversation naturally. That's not really me. If we get into a discussion, and I understand that we're like into the same thing, I talk to you all day about it, but I am not a storyteller in a group. Whereas there are some people who just naturally get it. You get them in a group of a circle of like 8 people, and they go into storyteller mode, and it just kind of comes naturally. So I have learned over time to follow some of those great conversationalists and just pick up, because we all have those friends who are just really good at it, and especially the ones that are really great at connecting with new people on one-on-one. And I realize there's certain questions that they ask. So the question that everybody in history is just falls back on when you meet someone new, like meet them anywhere. Oh, okay, what do you do? And it yields boring. It's a boring question, and it usually yields boring answers. But I learned just when I tweak that, and now when I meet someone, I don't really say that. I might ask that to get a premise, but the much more interesting question, and the one that always has an interesting answer, is how did you get here? Or how did you get there? And that you're asking for the story, and you're asking for the real story. So if you apply that to a business, you have an answer for how you got there and why you're doing this business. And if you're doing it for any amount of time, it indicates that it's something, some compelling driving reason other than just because this seemed like the most financially optimized decision I could make with my limited resources. So that has helped me a lot. Even just that question of digging into the how or the why, but the how is maybe a little bit easier tactically in the moment to say, as opposed to just the what. Like, what do you do? I do this. Why is a great question, but it also might get a little too deep for like that early first jab of what is this. But the how is, I find, like a really great bridge. So in everyday conversation, I find that asking how someone got to somewhere is a really great bridge into a deeper conversation. And I think it's kind of the same for a business. So it's like, how did you arrive at this? How did you come up with this? Or how does this work? Like I really like the how questions because they're not, they allow you to really it's kind of just like a natural story because you have to tell a story to answer that question. Anyway, this came to mind.
Right. So here's a how question, and that's an extension of that. A lot of the most overwhelming question we get at IDEA is, I've got this idea, I need a technical co-founder. How do I convince someone to join on board, right? Tell us your story. I know you have a co-founder that you've worked with on 2 businesses now. How did that come about? How do you tell each other, hey, look, let's not take a salary and work on this? How do you do that?
Well, so those are 2 different questions. I have an answer to that question, and then my story is a little different. So okay. My answer to that question would be, I'm actually not a huge fan of having co-founders in business. I see it not work out far more often than it works out. I believe in partnerships. Absolutely. You need your team. But to me, if you have a really great idea and you don't currently have a co-founder, and when I say don't work with co-founders, I mean, I'm not talking about co-founders in general. I'm talking about seeking out a co-founder and I have an idea. Right. Yeah, so I want to differentiate between those 2 things. Because if you come up with something as a team, you're kind of bought in from day one. But in this context, where you're saying like, I need to find a technical co-founder, you are never going to find somebody that's as passionate about your idea as you are. And no matter what kind of equity you give them, there's always going to be that imbalance. And more often than not, it blows up. So that's my advice to people who say, how do I find a technical co-founder, is you need to be the technical co-founder, because it is going to take you less time to learn to code and build a prototype of what you need than it is to find someone who you match well with, who's really bought into your idea, who you really enjoy working with, who is kind of on the same life stage where you can take the same kind of risks. Like, you're looking for a very specific person who might take you a very long time to find. And in the meantime, if you're trying to start a company that needs a technical co-founder, it kind of indicates that you need to be technical to some degree. So that's my answer to that. And it's not the answer people want, because learning to code and not become an engineer, but learning to build things is not easy. And it takes hard work. Right. But when you do it and you do it well enough to have a product, even if it's just barely working, you are over the cliff. And then you can start hiring people, as opposed to look for someone that I need to, basically be a technical co-founder. So that's my answer to that question. But to your other question about me and my story, so Greg is my currently CEO of Crystal. We started Attend.com together when we were in our senior year at Northeastern. He was the CEO of that company. I was the CTO, and we started it because we just made for the NU Entrepreneurs Club. IDEA used it as well. It was this little like name tag printing thing. It was just a simple little app, and we built it, and eventually that became like our first company, which didn't end well for us, but it was like a sandbox for us to learn. So we ultimately we worked together on it because we started together on it, and it wasn't like a seeking out co-founder type thing. And honestly, in this company, we're not really like, so Greg didn't, we kind of started the business together, and then he went and worked in another thing for about 3 years. He led a company in San Francisco and then through an acquisition. He did a really good job there. And then I was kind of like running Crystal by myself. And then we had this like reuniting moment in 2018 where he came and moved to Nashville, and I was really struggling like a lot with what with my just CEO role, because I'm a technical person and a creative, and I was just really struggling on the business end. So those are all his strengths, so he's really great at it. So we decided we're gonna join up together again in it. But even then, it's like it wasn't I'm looking for someone. It was more of this is a natural combination, complementary skill sets. And at that point, it was bringing on a new executive to an existing team. So it wasn't really like finding a co-founder to start the thing, get it off the ground. So it was a much different situation. But yeah, I should probably stop talking because I have a lot of thoughts on this subject, because I've seen so many companies blow up because of no other reason than the founders just did not get along. So yeah.
Yeah. I know we have to get a Q&A soon, but I do want to get Mike and Debbie's quick thoughts on this as well. Debi, you work with so many early stage founders and founding teams. I'm sure that a lot of them run into founding team issues. When you look at that team slide, when they pitch you, what's a good team story behind that team that makes you go, yeah, they're solid, they won't fall apart?
Well, the whole point of the team slide from an investor's perspective is to sort of say, be able to answer the question in my mind as I'm watching it, why you? Why is this team going to succeed for this idea? Because there are very few ideas left in the world that are truly unique. At any given time, there are many, many people working on the same idea. They may have different approaches to it, or they may have different angles on it, but they're trying to solve the same problem. And so what I want to know, the story I want to know behind that team slide is why you? Like, why are you going to succeed at this? I mean, a perfect example is your own company, Wentao, with CACTIVATE. The problem that you guys work on is a problem that many people have tried to solve, but there's a story that you tell about your team that makes me truly believe that this is a team that can actually bring this thing to life. And I think that's what's important behind the team slide. And that can be a slightly different story than the story we're talking about now. That story is about, sort of what makes this team special, what makes you believe that this team will bust through walls to get it done, what makes you think this team has that it factor that they're going to, be special, and what makes you think that this team actually knows something that nobody else knows, or sees something in a way that other people don't see it. So that's what I'm looking for in that story. Okay,
so assuming that this team gets funded by Debi and then does really well, and then moves on to Series A and B, and then starts pitching G20, are you looking for something extra or something different in that case, Mike? Something more tangible, a different construct? What does that then evolve into?
Yeah. When I became a VC, I talked to a bunch of people to get advice on how to be a good one. And one of the best pieces of advice I got was Jit Saxena, who told me, pick the race and bet the jockey. What he was saying is find a market you like, a problem. And then rather than pick the horse, which is the product, pick the team. Pick the team that you think is going to win in that market. Like, that's how important the team is. So that team slide, that it's so fundamental. And I think that most investors have that orientation: pick the race, bet the jockey. It also speaks to the importance of market selection for entrepreneurs, but I'll leave that for another time. What I'm looking for in the team are really three things. One is either experience or the intangibles necessary to build a business. Ideally the experience. I've invested in people that dropped out of college to do something, and it's because while they didn't have the experience, they had the intangible qualities: leadership, vision, attention to detail. I just felt like this was a backable person, and that's the first thing. The second thing I always look for is someone who has intimate knowledge of the customer problem. Intimate, lived experience. They really understand the nuances of the problem that they're solving, either because they're someone who's been responsible for solving it in the past, or because of their close contact with the folks who did that. And then the third thing is I'm looking for someone who has real depth of understanding of the nature of the solution. Meaning, in order to solve this problem, you're really going to need to understand all aspects of, 3D printing, or data virtualization, or whatever the hell it is, applied machine learning. And so I'm looking for that expertise in the core area of IP that is going to be a dimension of competition among the competitors in the space. So that's the way that I think about team. And I'm really looking for those three qualities, not necessarily in three different people, but I'm looking to make sure that they're represented.
Excellent. So we know from Drew, start your company, learn how to code, get funded by Debi, grow it to $1 million annual recurring, and then get funded by Mike. So that's a good journey. I think we covered the what, the why, and the how. So I think that let's take the remaining 15 minutes or so and take some questions. So we encourage the audience to start asking some questions again. We will give away 2 copies of Debi's book. So we already have one from Siddharth. It's how do you tell the storytell the math behind your decisions in building your business without confusing the audience? I assume that it's when you have to do a lot of number telling, and you have to basically, be constrained by the facts, but then how do you still tell that in an engaging way? Why don't we start with you, Drew? I'm assuming you have a technical product, you've raised Series B, a lot of numbers. How do you still make that engaging and tell the story in that respect?
Yeah, I'm assuming this is for the product, like a technical product, or is it talking about like revenue and growth?
I'm not sure if we can get Siddharth to answer this in time,
Right,
but
yeah.
I think it's behind decisions in building your business. So
yeah,
probably math, maybe I'm optimizing something.
Well, I think we have this is interesting insight on, so Crystal at the core is a prediction engine, and it started with a pretty simple prediction model, which is, it's a outcropping of like a pretty technical machine learning technique called like Bayesian statistical analysis. And I cannot go into a conversation with someone who doesn't have any background in data science and say, yeah, we use like a big set of training data with multiple data points, and then we go into this Bayesian statistical analysis engine and we create a whole probability set on n-grams that predict, like that's what Crystal does at the core. But unless someone is, deeply technical, I can't really talk about the choices of, algorithms or how we've gotten different types of prediction models to perform in a certain way. All of that is sitting under the surface, and it does make our technology valuable and like accurate and unique and important. But that's like if I went to the car dealership, like I went to the Toyota dealership with my girlfriend because she's trying to buy a new car, and the salesman, like I don't know why, he starts going really deeply into the engine and all what's happening under the hood of this car. Meanwhile, she is like explicitly asking him, hey, do you have this in this very specific blue? All I care about is blue and the sunroof, and that's it. And he just keeps going on about, we got the heated seats and we have, the different types of options for the interior. She didn't care at all. And he just kept talking about the features of the car. So that's what I try to think of. It's like, all right, what is this person actually looking for? Because otherwise I'm just going to shoot right over their head. And it's like, as a business owner, you've got this complete picture into the entire blueprint behind your company. And so many details and you want to share it because you're excited about it. But you got to remember, whereas you have this full picture, all someone's looking for is like a snapshot and a very specific piece, depending on who they are, so. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, Mike and Debbie, I'll leave this open if you guys want to jump in. When you come across a really technical product, and they get maybe 5 minutes, maybe even less with you, how do you want them to grab your attention in that respect? Why don't I start with you, Debbie? I mean, I'm sure you do. We're both in the Boston startups ecosystem, a lot of technical products here. If it's a product that you're maybe not so familiar with, how does that founder grapple with telling you the story, but also giving you the facts in that respect?
Yeah, well, I loved Drew's answer. I thought Drew's answer was dynamite. So I'm not sure I can add that much to it, except for, I guess, when I think about when somebody's actually trying to tell me a very technical description of what they're doing, I often, stop them. And I'm like, I don't need to know that yet. So I guess in my opinion, that really technical description or that the math, I want to hear later. I don't want to hear that right first. I want to be captivated by the idea. I want to be, really comfortable that they understand the customer and the problem really well. And if they can convince me of that, then I'll listen more. But I typically don't want to hear that the math behind the decision quite yet until I've kind of, sussed it out. I think particularly with early stage startups, a lot of that math is a bunch of assumptions and they're going to change and they may not be right. And so, if you focus too much on explaining that math, you could miss out or give someone, sort of the wrong angle on what you're doing versus just trying to get them excited about the problem and then your approach to solving it without getting into the dirty details right away.
Right. And also
that's for the second meeting.
Exactly. I think that a lot of founders, want to keep in mind that oftentimes when you send out a deck or a cold email, it's just to get that second meeting, not to get them to invest on that first one. So in the interest of getting to more questions, Mike, I'll pose a new question to you, which is, does the story change? Now, in this case, it was phrased as you open more outlets and locations. I think we can rephrase that to, or paraphrase that to, as you grow your business, does your story change? Does your vision evolve? And what do you see being a good balance of that?
It does evolve, but it evolves in a very deliberate and considered way. So you want to tell your story the same way every time, in every place, at every point of contact with the market. And come together with your team, figure out what that way is, commit to it, commit to that discipline, and then do that. When you feel like the story isn't resonating, or you hit upon a better way of telling it through some random, mutation in the go-to-market model, reconvene the team, decide on the new way to tell the story, and then same thing, proliferate that everywhere. Like, what you don't want is a dissonant, kind of data point. Like, if you've dated someone and like they seem great, and you go to dinner and they treat the waiter like shit. You don't say, wow, this is a great person who treats service providers poorly. You say, wow, maybe they're a dick, I don't know. All right. And so, so it causes you to rethink your whole, whatever, that single dissonant data point, and it renders the story every place else, inauthentic, right? So you want to be consistent and disciplined in the way you do it, with an understanding that the story may evolve over time. And when it does, it needs to evolve everywhere simultaneously.
Just to follow up on that, I think you recently did a podcast or a talk, something along the lines of how much is it okay to lie? Now, can you just maybe give us a quick sneak peek on, how cautious and aware founders should be of that?
Well, look, I think there's a big difference between truth well told and deliberate misrepresentation and fraud. It was in the context of Ozy Media and the Theranos litigation. I think we as a startup community, people are taking a little too much schadenfreude in the fall of Elizabeth Holmes, and I think that's inappropriate. And the genesis of the piece was, hey guys, we've all kind of pushed the edge a little bit. Let's use this as an opportunity for some reflection, right? You do want to package your value proposition and the progress in your business in a way that makes it attractive, right? You want to do that, but you need to stop short of deliberate misrepresentation of the underlying facts. That poisons the well, and if you're caught doing that once, your career is over. I mean, it's a small community, and you're never going to be able to raise money again.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a really hot topic right now, and everyone's under the microscope. That could possibly change in the future as well. So moving on to the next one, Debi, I'll throw this one to you. Every team has, assuming that they're a team, individuals with maybe multiple styles. So how do you get different people with different styles to tell the same story without having it kind of, tweak around too much? Maybe it's like if you get your, other team member that's coming from a different angle, you still want them to tell the same story. But how do you keep it grounded? What are the things that stays constant and what are the things that is left up to individual flair?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, to Mike's point, consistency is really key. And that consistency is both who's telling the story, whose mouth it's coming out of, and then also the different places where the story shows up in action. So hopefully your story is reflected in all different ways that your company represents itself in the market, whether it's customer service, how they hire, who they call advisors. All of those things should reflect the story of this company. And so it's really important that the story remains consistent and very authentic to, what this company is about. So I feel like, sure, people are going to have a slightly different style. Maybe they're more outgoing or humor or comfortable, being humorous to people, or maybe they're, prefer to use less words or whatever. Certainly people are going to put an element of their personal oral communication style when they tell it, but it really shouldn't vary that much in substance, in my opinion, because then it starts to feel inauthentic. And that is certainly something you want to avoid. Just to your earlier comment, I mean, I think trustworthiness and authenticity are key qualities that investors and mentors look for. I mean, we've done tons of research work on this, and trustworthiness is probably one of the highest characteristic traits that angel investors are looking for when they invest in a founder. We know this, from many data points. So I feel like if the story varies depending on who's telling it, then it starts to feel inauthentic, or it starts to feel like, well, maybe they don't really believe this. Because again, your stories are trying to reflect the values of the company and what they're all about.
True. I think that you probably have an interesting angle. So do you and Greg tell the Crystal No story differently? Do you go into a meeting and take care of different parts of the story? How is it between you two when you tell the story, or the individual styles involved? Are you on mute, Greg? Drew, sorry.
All right, I keep doing that. I don't know about between us being different, but the product is pretty much built to tailor your communication. So I've been thinking about this for years and doing a lot of the research and the data behind it. From the beginning, the first behavioral model and communication model that we kind of leaned on was DISC. We get past that now, but DISC is a really simple, just 4-factor personality model that is pretty reliable. And when you're using it as a heuristic, it's really, not all models are, or no models are perfect, but some of them are useful. It's a useful way to segment or tailor your communication. So Crystal, the Chrome extension, is kind of built on this premise to where you can, when you're looking up someone, say you're going to pitch them or sell them something or look to recruit them, it tells you how to tailor your communication style. Not the substance, doesn't tell you what to say, but it tells you how to say it. So the basics of that are for someone who's dominant, and you can look all this up on our site, but someone who's dominant, you just want to get right to the point. You don't want to you want to spare them the details. Someone who's high in influence or I, you want to be a lot more expressive, creative, colorful with your language, connect on a personal level. Someone who's high in steadiness, which is the S of DISC, you want to communicate first and foremost trust and consistency to build, just to allow them to prepare. And the C of DISC is someone who's high in conscientiousness. So that's the type of person you're going to want to speak to with a lot of detail and a lot of facts, and bring up the information and be ready for lots of skepticism. So that's kind of that's just like the highest level of it, but there's ways to change and tailor your communication without changing your story itself. You're just describing the same thing in a different way based on who your audience is. So that's kind of what we've built Crystal for.
Yeah, I encourage everyone to check it out. Find out, you may find out something new about yourself that you didn't know before. We have one more question from James. It's quite a specific one, so we can go through this. Is there a preferred structure or format of the story that stands a better chance in the eyes of the VC? Now, I know that we've already covered, really what we are looking for in a story. Maybe some some quick personal experience, or like, what's the one thing that you like to see or you've seen work in the past, maybe in a fundraising environment? Why don't we start with you, Drew, as the alumni entrepreneur?
Any chart that is up and to the right is usually good, and the steeper the slope, the better. So that's generally the best way to get the attention of a VC, especially if it's you want the accelerating steep slope of some important metric. But usually in the actual VC conversations, this is a thing, maybe it's a unique insight for people that are pitching. I learned very quickly that VCs talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and that they hear lots of people talk a lot about themselves without ever once asking what the VC wants. So you have to realize that VCs have their own story. They have their own customer story to tell, and they invest for very different reasons. So if you're talking to a big venture fund that's like Sequoia, they've got a very different goal than Salesforce does, who's a strategic venture fund, or an angel investor who's just investing their own money and they're looking to help startups. Very different reasons for investing. But so that's another thing to keep in mind as you tailor your story. For example, if you're talking to an individual angel, this is someone who's probably not really looking as much for the financial return. They want it, but they're probably doing it because they just love it. They love startups, they love helping the community, and they want to participate in a big outcome if it's there. But they're the people that are kind of in the trenches with you. Meanwhile, if you're talking to a strategic investor, it's a very different reason. You're usually talking to a company that could be looking to you as an acquirer, or they're looking for a market advantage. So you really have to know what their market's like and speak in terms of the macro picture. And then for a traditional VC, it's a different story for them too. So I would say just keep in mind that they have their own story that they're trying to fit you in, and it's not all about you. It's also about them. So.
Right, as Mike said, the greatest marketers are the best listeners as well, right? So also build the fundamentals up and to the right and make sure it's truthful. So focus on the fundamentals first. We're right on time. Maybe what I do is I'll leave this for the panelists. We'll go one by one. We can start with Debi. We went through a lot of information. If there's one thing you want the entrepreneurs to take away from today's discussion, just the one thing, maybe a single sentence or two, what do you think is that thing you'd want people to take away today?
In terms of creating your story,
in terms of creating your
telling your story.
Yep.
I think it's really important that you know what your unique value proposition is. That work is really hard to do, and it has to be very much rooted in your customer's need, pain point that you're trying to solve. And I feel like once you are able to really nail your customer value proposition, you are then able to create a story that will be compelling and interesting. But it does take a lot of work. It takes a lot of reflection. It takes a lot of sort of understanding in a different way what you want, why you want people to care about what you're building. And so, knowing that and getting to the heart of that pretty quickly will allow you to create a really great story.
Absolutely. Always stick to the value prop. Mike, what about you?
Just remember, nobody cares what it is or how it works until they know why it matters to them.
Really?
You're all like water-based meat puppets trying to navigate this world, living our own dramas and victory narratives, and like going, we're out in the world, trying to assess relevance, trying to figure out what to pay attention to. And nobody cares what it is or how it works until they know why it matters to them. So start there and go get them.
Oh, that's really good. Drew, I'll let you wrap this up.
I think I'll just maybe press into Mike's point a little bit more. One thing that's been the most helpful for me has been to not even in general help them understand why it matters to them, but actually include the person, like explicitly include the person in the story. So if you're talking to somebody and I'm selling them, let's say use the car example, I'm trying to sell them a car. Rather than just start explaining the features of the car, ask, why do you want to drive this car? And like, what's your goal? And then you start telling the story around the trip they want to take across country to California. And you start telling that story for them. And for us, a lot of times that means like, when I'm telling the story, I have that person's picture up on the screen because we happen to have like a product where you can look up anybody. So including the person as much as you can in it, because everybody loves listening to the story about themselves.
Much more helpful than the sell me this pen from Wolf of Wall
Yeah.
Street. So I'll let Wendy take this from here. I think we're just about on time. I'll hand this over to you, Wendy. Again, thank you so much to all the wonderful panelists.
Thank you, Wen Tao. I think we can all give them a big virtual round of applause. I thought this was an incredible session. Thank you, attendees, for joining us tonight. There will be a recording of this that I will share after the event. I would like to thank all of our panelists. You guys are absolutely incredible. Wen Tao, thank you so much for moderating. You hit it out of the park. And I'd also like to thank my colleague, Katie Hemphill, who helped pull this panel together while I was away on my honeymoon. So thank you so much. But thank you all and have a wonderful evening. Talk to you soon.